Welcome, friends, to the Do Less, Be More channel. I'm Amy, and this is a 4-part Ask the Expert series on burnout. I've got an incredible network and community of inspiring teachers, healers, coaches, and practitioners who come with a wealth of knowledge and experience. And so I wanted to bring some of these inspiring humans into conversation with me around burnout. Burnout is very prevalent today. It almost feels like an epidemic, more so than ever, and especially since the beginning of 2020. And so I believe that it's really important for us to talk about it so that we can hopefully find ways not only to heal through and recover from burnout as a collective, but also move towards operating in a society where burnout is not the norm. Through awareness comes prevention, and just as each of us holds a single point of awareness in the experience of this ever-expanding universe, there are also various points of awareness or ways to look at burnout. So in this 4-part series, we're going to explore burnout from 4 different perspectives: the mental, the physical, the spiritual, and the emotional. And this week, I'm happy to bring on my dear friend and old coworker, Bougie. She is a holistic nutritionist, biochemist, sleep expert, and stress mastery educator. And we're going to discuss burnout from a physical perspective together. All right, Lee. Well, thank you for agreeing to come on and join this whole journey of exploring burnout from 4 different perspectives. Obviously, I wanted and was very excited to talk with you about burnout from the physical perspective because of your background and expertise. So maybe you can start with just introducing yourself and your story and your background.
My name is Bougie, and I started out actually in the lab. So I worked both in a hospital lab and I did a bunch of research as well. And then I moved on to clinical research. So I ran studies mostly in the area of working on your immune system and cancer. So really, from my background, I consider myself a science geek. I've always just been fascinated by how our body works. But it's funny, after over 20 years of doing that, I decided I wanted to learn more. I grew up in this family with, I jokingly say my parents are hippies. And back then in Edmonton, it was really unusual to go get your fresh ground peanut butter from the health food store. That was just so not typical. And we drank herbal teas in the evening, and we spent as much time as possible in the outdoors. And so I really grew up with a much more holistic background that way. And so I went back to school and I became a holistic nutritionist. So I could take all of that biochemistry background and apply that much more in understanding how we can work with nutrition. And I studied a lot about herbs as well. I went and trained as a stress mastery educator. I did a lot of work in sleep as well. So sleep is really an area of specialty for me for a variety of different reasons. I've really dug into and worked into that area, which is, why you wanted me to talk about physical, because really so many of those things, all that, nutrition and all sleep is just such a huge one. And of course, you can't talk about burnout without stress being involved. And so that's really my background. I have worked mostly after taking nutrition. I taught at the nutrition school, so I have many years of teaching that. And then I've also primarily worked in supplement companies. So heading up research and development, formulating supplements, working with the manufacturers, that kind of thing. And I just did another major career change. And I just a few weeks ago started working actually at an addiction and wellness center.
It's so great to be able to speak with someone who has such a varied and extensive background. So coming from the pharmaceutical and the science background, and then into the holistic medicine, and then in supplements, and now going back to more holistic and people connected work. What about burnout for yourself? Have you, or can you share about your own personal burnout stories?
I have a couple of cases of definitely burnout in my life. The one was mostly on the personal front. Yep. I was married to somebody with PTSD from being in Afghanistan. And so I had many years of being a caregiver to somebody who had a lot of struggles, and being that caregiver and a lot of going through a lot of traumatic things myself in that, from being on a Skype call with him when he was in Afghanistan when a bomb hit where he was. and really not knowing for hours whether or not he was alive for sure and what had happened there. And it's funny, I actually even suppressed that one and didn't even remember it till years later in a group thing around PTSD. It popped back out again, and I had not even recollected that had happened. Lots of stuff happened over the years, and eventually just hit this point of just not being able to function. And really hit that not too long ago. And one of the reasons for my career change was realizing I was in a place where the hours and not feeling the personal satisfaction of accomplishing things and helping people. I really hit that point where I could hardly get up in the morning and go to work. And that's not how I want to live, right? And then I found my energy just got lower and lower. So then it went from I could hardly get up and work in the morning to I didn't even really want to go out and see people, and I didn't want to do things that brought me joy because I just couldn't find the energy to do them.
And that's exactly burnout, right? What you're talking about is that lack of enjoyment in the things that used to be enjoyable, of energy, that extreme fatigue that happens when you used to be an energetic person, and that sense of accomplishment that you spoke to, right? Like the lack of purpose, the not caring anymore, all of that is exactly defining burnout. So
yeah,
you've been in it for sure. Thank you for sharing. It can be so helpful for us to find relatable stories, right? Because burnout looks uniquely individual, right? It is an individual experience, and it gets, just like you were able to relate to different burnout experiences for yourself, they came from very different reasons, and you probably experienced different symptoms of burnout as well. So nice to be able to hear other people's stories and what that looks like for relatability, because sometimes it can be hard to identify. Am I just extremely stressed, or am I actually burnt out?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the more personal one and the caregiving place was definitely way more emotional.
Yes.
And it was just really I cried all the time, and it was just very, very, very emotional. And that was what I felt the most in that one. And I would say this last time around, I was just feeling it way more physical.
Yeah, for sure. And probably mental too, right? Because burnout is prolonged, either physical, mental, or emotional stress, or all three. This would be a great segue into discussing what burnout means from a physical health perspective.
Physically, you can look at different aspects of it, right? It can be impacting your sleep, for example. And that can be, you just can't seem to quit sleeping, or it can be that stress has made you not be able to sleep, right? If you're feeling a lot of that mental stuff and everything's spinning around in your head, you may be laying there and not able to fall asleep, for example. So many different ways that can show up in your sleep. It's interesting when you look at full-on insomnia, that can be, often we think of insomnia as not being able to fall asleep at night, but it can be waking up a million times during the night. It can be waking up early in the morning and not being able to fall back asleep again. Sometimes it's getting lots of sleep, but you don't feel refreshed. Physical can be in our diet. We can be causing stress by not eating well.
Yes.
But often if we're stressed, we might not have the energy to actually be preparing healthy meals for ourselves. And then that can be causing stress in our body. So it can it can be that vicious cycle. And I think often the food things, when we are stressed, we have a tendency to want to reach for what we consider comfort food for us. I think one of the other aspects to really think about on the physical side of things when we're looking at being really, really stressed and, in burnout or heading into burnout, is to really over time look at where stress shows up for you in your body. Because our body talks to us all the time. And we're not very good at listening to it.
We're not. No.
We're really, I'm one of those people too. We're really not. And so for some people, very quickly when they're stressed, they'll start getting headaches. For some people, I start feeling the tension in my shoulders, and I realize, I go for massage and I feel like my shoulders went down by about 3 inches, because that's really, really where I feel it. Some people right away, it'll affect their digestion. There's different ways that stress can show up in our body. And the more we learn to recognize those early signs, the quicker we can start to make those adjustments rather than waiting until we're in burnout, because our body tells us way earlier on, and it can help a lot if we can learn to listen to that.
Absolutely. That awareness, that mind body awareness is so important. And you're right, the body is speaking to us all the time. The body knows. And so when we're in chronic stress and then obviously leading into burnout and in burnout, what is actually happening in our bodies? What's going on chemically and biochemically within our bodies when we're at that extreme state?
It could be a lot of different things, and it really depends on your biochemistry and the history of what you've been doing. So one of the things that's super common is our blood sugar being out of balance. Blood sugar really going up and down is a big problem for the majority of people.
Yeah.
And you may not think you're living on candy, but with so much processed food on our diet, like when we look at, I think a perfect example is breakfast. The average person is having toast with maybe jam or something on it in the morning, or they're having processed cereal. Or if you look in North America, what the vast majority of people eat for breakfast,
Sugar.
It really is.
Yeah.
And so we're starting our day with a whole bunch of sugar.
Yeah.
And our body sees that as a stress.
Yes.
So it makes a bunch of insulin to bring that blood sugar back down. And because we've given it so much sugar, our body reacts so strongly to that stressor, we tend to bring the sugar low again. And that's one of the reasons why halfway through the morning, most people are hungry again, or they're reaching for coffee or something like that to keep going. I've heard so many people say they don't have breakfast because then they're hungry halfway through the morning when they do. And it's interesting because when they've had that breakfast, they've created that blood sugar up and down, that roller coaster, and you're starting your day with your body stressed out and trying to help balance that blood sugar. And it's hard for it to regain that balance. That blood sugar roller coaster is a huge component. And over time, more and more, that becomes more dysregulated.
Right.
And so a big part of burnout for a lot of people is actually blood sugar.
So what would be 3 tips or recommendations you would give to someone who is experiencing burnout right now?
So I thought about this ahead of time, and there's a million tips out there, right? And so many of them are, great recommendations about meditating and yoga and all kinds of wonderful things we can do. So I tried to kind of think about this in a bit of more of a unique way, and things that are kind of examples from my life.
Great.
And so the first one I thought of is to really think outside of the box about what works for you. And my example for that is kind of a unique one. And for me, it's getting out in the shop with my dad. Whether or not it's working on a hot rod or making metal candle holders together, or whatever kind of project we come out with, that is just one of the things I absolutely love to do, and de-stresses me better than probably anything else in the world. And I think there's this physical aspect of getting in there and doing things, and there's the creativity of what we're designing together, and there's this mental aspect of learning, and there's this emotional aspect of I'm doing something with my dad, who is just one of my favorite people in the whole entire world, and I'm doing this with him. And you will, in no list of ways to de-stress, find, go operate some power tools with your father. It's not on any of those lists, but for me, that's magic.
For sure. It's great because you're speaking to being present, right? A lot of burnout and stress comes from the anxiety or worry we have about the future, or, the rumination of what has happened in the past. And so if we can be present, and especially as our creative beings, right? And as human beings, we are a social species. So you're hitting so many nails on the head there in terms of being present and expressing your creativity and being connected, being in the present moment. It's huge.
Yeah.
Great example. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's one of the things I think, we can read so many blogs and articles, but it's really stopping and thinking about your world and your life and who you care about and what makes the most sense for you. And the second one has some similarities to it. And we've all heard, I'm sure, the idea of think about what you love to do as a kid. And a number of years ago, I stopped and read that. And of course, I'd heard it a bunch of times before, but for whatever reason, it hit me that day. And I stopped and thought about it. And I thought, I absolutely loved to swim as a kid. I mean, there were a number of years my family all called me the fish. Actually, I didn't even plan this ahead of time, but I have my mug. This is, I'm a mermaid.
That's great.
Love. I'm the happiest in the water. And I think when we're little kids, we truly know so much more about what makes us happy, what brings us joy, what helps us just feel free. And so really stopping and thinking about what you loved as a kid and incorporating that again in your life is, I think, a really important one for me.
Good. I love it. Great recommendation. And what's your third?
My third one really comes from the stress mastery training that I took.
Yep.
And one of the things that was very helpful in that was when we talked about, so often when we look at things that will help our stress, it's big things. It's go do your yoga class, it's fit in, going to the gym, it's cook good meals, it's things that take time. And one of the things that we really talked about there is it's not just that one thing you go do for an hour, it's the 100 things you do in the day. It's stopping at work every hour for 2 minutes and closing your eyes and doing some deep breathing, or just going for a walk around the office, or walking out the front door of the building and taking a deep breath. It's so many of those things that take 2 minutes. And you may remember this. I came back from that training and I gave a presentation to everybody at work about all of these things I had learned at Stress Mastery. And that one really stuck. The group really got into this great discussion of what are some tiny things we could do in the day. And we came up as a group with this idea to do plank every day at 10 a.m. And we set this reminder and everyone in the office would stop and plank for 1 minute.
Yes.
And then we would all get up and we'd be laughing and teasing each other, and we would all go back to our desks. And the energy in the office was so different than before we did that. And it was planking for 1 minute. And so I'd say the last tip is don't get too hung up on the big things you have to do, but think about those little tiny moments of how you can keep taking care of yourself all day.
That's good. Yeah. The mini breaks. It's really, it's a huge difference. Like you were saying before, the other examples of just closing your eyes when you've been staring at your computer and just take a couple of deep breaths in. That in itself, doing that a few times a day, so powerful, and does not require scheduling in an hour and a half to figure out how you're going to do yin yoga or go exercise or go for a run. So
yeah. And I think that's really important if you are in that place of burnout, because if you can't find the energy to go walk for an hour,
yes,
at least you can say, okay, I can't do that right now, but maybe I can close my eyes and do some deep breathing for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Lee. This was really lovely. I'm so glad that you agreed to take the time to have a little chat with me about burnout and lending all of your expertise and wisdom to this conversation.
Oh, thank you. I'm always happy to chat with you. And I love talking about this stuff. Clearly, this is an area that is a lot of passion for me.